Welcome, my friends, to another day of vlogmas. And as you can see, I'm not in the car, I'm not in my studio, I am in the forest on a hike with my family. And I wanted to take you all along to show you how I gather little ideas and how those ideas evolve into something that ends up in my art journal, in a watercolor painting, using it for color inspiration, pattern, texture. So I am searching, I'm gonna take photos, film some stuff, and show you how I take some of the things that I find on this type of outing in nature and then apply it to my work when I get ready to look for inspiration or utilize that inspiration when I make art. I'm sure it's very obvious from the things I share here on my YouTube channel to all of my different social media platforms, my artwork, as well as the classes that I teach, that I am incredibly inspired by nature. It is my favorite way to find inspiration, to look for colors, color combinations, pattern, texture, designs, shapes that I can use in my work. And I really believe that the best place to find ideas that keep your work authentic is in your everyday life. And this kind of everyday life is going to look different for everybody out there. At this current chapter in my life, I spend most of my time, any free time I have, connecting with nature and adventure. And that is what I do for fun, for entertainment. It's how we spend time as a family as well. But at different chapters in my life, I have lived in cities, I have lived in small towns, I have lived at the beach, I have lived near the woods. And I always say that no matter where you're at, even if it is on a city block in an apartment building like I spent at one point in my life for many years, there is inspiration to be found in the cracks in the sidewalk, to perhaps architecture, to what the sky is doing that day, things affected by weather, or if you're living close to nature, there are so many different things that you can pull from and incorporate into your work. And what's interesting about my process is I don't always necessarily look for or find things to translate literally. There are times when I'm looking for inspiration that I will sit down and draw or paint exactly what I see. But a lot of the time, I'm actually looking for something small, unexpected, like a color combination, maybe a little shape, some kind of unexpected design or pattern, or anything that catches your eye, makes you stop to take notice. These are all things that really speak to you, your experiences, your day in, day out life, and these are ways that you can tie yourself and your authenticity into the artwork you create. Now, on this particular hike, we hiked about 4 miles on this trail. We went through different ecosystems. We went through the woods. We went by a marsh. It was a really beautiful, foggy morning, and there was a lot for me to see. A lot of things I'm used to, like bark and leaves and ferns. Lots of colors I'm used to living in the Pacific Northwest. But no matter how many times I encounter the same colors, designs, shapes, same trails or walks and hikes that I go on, I always try my best to pay attention to the things that continue to catch my eye. These are things that I will document with my camera and then further explore them later on when I have time back at my studio. This particular hike, since we are hiking in the winter time, was really wet, very green, lots of shades of green, lots of shades of brown as well because it was quite muddy. I also noticed lots of little pops of color in mushrooms and ferns that have died and kind of turned this beautiful orange color. I was also inspired by the clothing that my daughter and husband were wearing with their brightly colored hats, as well as my daughter's vest. The entire time, I'm always paying attention to what catches my eye. And I thought it'd be fun to share with you a few of the things that I actually brought back to my studio to play around with. And the first is color. Documenting using color is one of my favorite ways to pull in my own experiences to my art, even if that art is unrelated to the experience I had finding that color. So something that stood out to me on our hike was the color green and a bright orange. I kept stumbling upon these color combinations in the foliage, in dead leaves or ferns, really bright rust color against some of that greenery. My husband was also wearing an orange hat, which kind of kept catching my eye along that trail. And so no matter what I am doing, even if I am going for a walk on a place or a trail that I have always been, I always try to take a few pictures of colors that capture my attention or catch my eye. And I will bring that inspiration back to my studio and just quickly capture that with either watercolors, markers, colored pencils. I'll do like a little swatch. I often use scraps of paper for this process so that I can just quickly document some of the favorite colors that I observe in some of the photos that I have taken. I hang on to these swatches and I pull them out if I am looking for an interesting color combination, if I'm interested in infusing my life into something that has nothing to do with the colors. So I do a lot of florals over here, a lot of surface design and pattern that have nothing to do often with maybe a woodsy forest hike, but I might take this color combination and play around with it and even apply it to surfaces that happen in the summertime or another season or time of year. My goal is to always capture the colors that I am drawn to really quickly, document them, keep them on hand so I can always pull them for future projects. Something else that caught my eye on this particular hike was all of the dead vines and branches and things that would otherwise be really bright and colorful during another season. I absolutely love dead or weathered branches, foliage, flowers, you name it, I'm going to capture it because there's interesting things that happen when a lot of things in nature decay. I like looking and staying aware of lines, shapes, interesting things that I can either use to practice or explore. Now, for this particular example, I was really drawn to the dead ferns that had once again turned this really bright, kind of burnt sienna, a little orangey brown color. And I love the way that they looked in that vertical manner. And this is something that I would just utilize as a way to practice, to play around, and to explore shapes that I wouldn't otherwise maybe think of or come up with. So part of getting into your life, out into the world when it comes to your art, even if it's just in your backyard or in a local park or looking up at the sky, is really capturing things that you might not otherwise think of capturing if you were just sitting there hunched over your sketchbook or art journal. I often use unusual shapes and designs as a way to simply practice. And for me, sometimes this practice does not necessarily look like capturing something in a realistic way, capturing something that is maybe beautiful or even recognizable. It is just about the process of taking something I see, often bringing it back within a photograph, and seeing how I can put my twist on it, play around with the shapes or lines, maybe the color, and just use that element as something to play around with in my own surfaces and work. When it comes to making art and really carving out a consistent creative practice every day, sometimes you don't want to create your next masterpiece or illustrate something or draw anything that's even recognizable. I tend to gravitate a lot towards expression and abstraction as ways to warm up, to practice, to play with new supplies. And so something like a dead fern or branches that have lost all their leaves, something that might have a lot of line or pattern, texture, are really great things that you can utilize to practice, to play, and explore. There's something very interesting that comes with really exercising that muscle of creativity, practicing what it feels like to look at something and capture it in your own way, whether it's illustrative, whimsical, simple, or abstract. It's really important to make time to play with the things that you might see in your everyday life, things that really capture your attention, and see what you can come up with. My own are often messy, really fast little explorations that I either paste back into my art journal or file away and use at a later time. Something else that always catches my eye when I am out in nature are clusters of things. Sometimes it's foliage, leaves, mushroom, pine cones. Sometimes it's shells on the beach. I am very drawn to little collections or clusters of things that naturally occur in nature. So perhaps after a storm, next to a storm drain, in the street, in our yard, I might find little piles of leaves or pine needles just positioned perfectly from nature, from the wind, from that storm. And on our hike, there was a lot of this. We had just gotten through a big storm, and we chose to hike after the mud cleared a little bit, but there were still remnants of all of the damage done by the wind, and there was a lot of foliage, lots of things on the side of the trail as well as in the middle of the trail. And I am always on the lookout for this type of subject matter. For me, it looks like a little cluster, just a pile of random things that I can capture with my phone or my camera, and then once again bring back to the studio and explore. I really like things that naturally occur in nature, the things that often get paired or clustered together because of the wind or rain or the tide coming in and out of the ocean. And so I really enjoy playing with that type of thing on any kind of surface. This is another way for me to get out of maybe things that I might repeat over and over again, or perhaps the composition or way that I place things on a surface. I love just documenting what I find in nature, even if it's a random little pile of things that have fallen or been clustered together because of a windy day. And this particular little cluster had this beautiful little mushroom, some dead leaves, some beautiful moss, a few pine cones and branches. And I thought it made kind of this interesting cluster of objects that eventually could be played around with, turned into maybe a repeat design or pattern that I could then take and turn it into perhaps some kind of fabric or digital papers. I really liked the cluster of all the different shapes that occurred naturally in this design. So I wanted to take this particular inspiration back to my studio and just play around with it. My own playing, practicing, exploration is not about creating an end result or some kind of final idea. It's really about just starting to mess around with that inspiration, taking it from the photo or my observation to some sort of surface material. Sometimes it's a sketchbook, sometimes it's loose paper, sometimes it's my art journal, and I will vary the materials that I use. Often it's really quick, expressive sketching, messing around with the shapes, designs, maybe adding color here and there. This is how I end up kind of brainstorming and coming up with ideas. It is through the journey, through the practice of making art, that I then will land on, okay, I know what I'm going to do with this next time around. I'm going to play around with different tools and supplies, maybe alter my surface, go bigger, go smaller, and take this to a different level. Utilizing things that naturally occur in nature or things that you might just stumble upon that you did not rearrange, that perhaps it was weather or humans or something that's been cast aside, something you might stumble upon in your day in, day out life. Maybe it's a pile of laundry or something in your backyard, are all really fun things to pull inspiration from. I'm always looking for ideas and concepts that are detached from me having to set them up or come up with the idea. I like finding things that are already there that really catch my eye, that I can get creative with in a variety of different ways. So my favorite inspiration that I stumbled upon on our hike was when we hiked down from this really big high trail into marshland. And there were a lot of dead branches with dead foliage scattered around with a bunch of really beautiful spider webs just all over the place. There was something about the lighting. They were backlit, so the branches looked quite dark, and I took a gazillion pictures. I knew right away this was kind of the thing that was going to be the highlight of my inspiration gathering on this 4-mile hike. And I already know that I will be putting this to use in a variety of different ways as I move forward with my ideas this year. But I wanted to just quickly show you how I bring this back to my studio again and then mess around with it. I spent a lot of time with my brushwork with watercolors and ink, and I thought my first idea with those dead branches would be perfect to utilize with just practice for my brushwork and scattering them around my page in a variety of different directions. I just used the color black with watering down that black a little bit here and there to get some shades of gray. Again, the photos I took were very backlit. It was very foggy in the background, so it was high contrast and quite interesting. And so I wanted to just capture that in my initial experimentation with this inspiration. Again, this is not a masterpiece. This is not a finished surface. This is just me taking something I found that caught my eye and me starting to explore it in a creative way. Through this process of just playing around with my brush, I came up with a few more ideas of how I want to use these photos further on down the road with my drawing process, with working with acrylics, even going a little bit larger with my surface. I was really inspired by these dead branches and all those spider webs, and I'm super excited to explore them even further later on down the road. And my last little photo that inspired me was a mushroom that had kind of fallen over and it was exposing the underside. Now, there are lots of mushrooms around here, and even though we have passed our big mushroom season, they are still all over the trail. You're often stumbling upon them in unique places, and they always catch my eye. I cannot pass by a patch of mushrooms without taking a picture because they are so interesting when it comes to their shape, their color, and their design. If I happen to stumble on ones that have fallen over or the underside is exposed, I'm taking a picture because I love all that line work. And so I wanted to show you one more quick example of what I do when I have found a picture, when I have found something, when I'm out and about that really catches my eye and makes me think, I really want to dive into this a little bit further. And this time around, I'm going in with just my pen and lots of details. Now, this is when I have more time to explore, maybe repeat designs. I really thought the underside of that mushroom made for a great pattern element, something that you could draw and repeat over and over again and perhaps use in different ways with different color combinations. And so my first go was to just fill my surface with that basic shape that I pulled from the inspiration from the photo and see what I could come up with on my surface. I really wanted to play around with a repeat design, something that feels like pattern, and one of the quickest ways I can do this when I am exploring is letting those designs kind of float or drift off the page. You'll notice I've got a lot in the middle, but I've also kind of crammed and squeezed my designs around each other, letting some of them be cut off or give the illusion of drifting off of that page. And I'm just going to be repeating the same thing over and over again, getting that good outline pulled from my photo, and then adding all those wonderful lines that you find on the underside of a mushroom. I thought that this was a fun design to use, and I have some more ideas that I might be using it with further on down the road, including using colors and maybe even digitizing it a little bit so that it feels less like a fall winter design and maybe just feels like an abstract, interesting shape with a lot of unique details. What I love so much about really taking notice of shapes and lines or some kind of pattern when you're out and about or if you're in nature is that you can really easily apply this to your artwork. If you're somebody that enjoys drawing pattern, if you like doodling, or if drawing is maybe new to you, starting with shapes is one of the best places you can begin without that pressure. And I love taking notice and looking for things that have a unique shape to them, and then some kind of detail that I can play around with when I start to apply that to my own surfaces and my own artwork. I'm notorious, whether I'm in the woods or at the beach, to look for things that have a unique shape, from shells to mushrooms to interesting leaves and foliage. I'm really drawn to very simple designs that have a lot of detail on the inside. And so a mushroom, especially the underside of that mushroom, makes for great inspiration, and it really made for a fun surface to play around with once I got back to the studio after our hike. I wanted to finish this off by just adding a little bit of color to really pull out the inspiration I found in the moss in that picture as just one more way to add a really interesting dynamic element to this surface and to my experimentation with it. I'm hoping that just by seeing what it looks like for me to go out into this world, capture things, talk through what catches my eye, and how I bring those things back and play around with them in my work, inspires you to maybe get more present in your own daily life. Start taking notice of things that are interesting to you. This is the easiest way, again, to pull yourself and your authenticity into your artwork. Now, I wanted to also take all that inspiration from our magical hike in the forest and apply it to one more surface, which will be my last video dedicated to the theme of Vlogmas that I will be sharing with you all tomorrow. I want to take this a step further and use my love of illustration and storytelling, taking that into the pages of my art journal, and really channeling the inspiration that I found on that hike and seeing what I can come up with. I'm hoping to see you all back here tomorrow, and I'm hoping this brings you a little bit of inspiration to go out and find something unique to use in your art.